For the most part, I like there to be interplay between my preaching and teaching, my writing columns, and then book writing to see where, all these things can be working together to hopefully lead to help for readers. The very best thing I think you can do as a writer is give those editors your very best work from the get-go when all of their emphasis is on making a good book great rather than making a so-so book good. Reading a lot more isn't going to make you a better writer. You have to get your reps in. But just writing a bunch is not going to make you more thoughtful or engaging or insightful. You have to have your reading in.
He's a former missionary to Romania and a regular columnist for the Gospel Coalition. And he's written for outlets such as the Washington Post, Christianity Today, and World. He's taught at Wheaton College, lectured at Oxford, and played a key role in shaping the Gospel Project and the Christian Standard Bible. Trevin is the author of several books, including The Thrill of Orthodoxy and Gospel-Centered Teaching, and he hosts the podcast Reconstructing Faith. He and his wife, Karina, have 3 children. So thank you, Trevin. We're so excited to have you here today.
I'm really honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. And today we decided to name this podcast The Habits of a Prolific Writer. I think if that word applies to anyone, it applies to you. You've written a lot. You look relatively young. So I'm kind of curious about, how did you start? Is this what you've always wanted to do? Or have you kind of fallen into writing like so many people do? Tell us a little more.
I think I first wanted to be a writer of some sort when I was in elementary school. That's when I started writing stories, and I just loved what you can do with words, and you could pass these little stories around, and people in your class would read them and then talk about them. And it was really from a really young age, I just felt like, words are my thing. And that's really what I wanted to do. And I loved reading too growing up. And so that is a part of it as well. But it was really in college when I just started writing regularly on just trying to get the discipline of getting better and honing the craft and improving and not just how I was expressing myself, but also, the insights that I had to share that I wanted to get across to other people. And so, yeah, from that point on, it seems like my self-perception and identity as a writer has just been confirmed and expanded over the years.
Well, yeah, clearly, I think you're kind of filling a lot of needs in the Christian world and writing space. You talk a lot about theology and history and philosophy. I mean, are those all things that you're just naturally interested in? And those are kind of where have you studied, or do you consider yourself just a student of those things and kind of writing to learn?
It's a little bit of both. Writing is fed by reading. And to read a lot, it helps to be really interested in whatever you're reading. So
Right.
there are some things I read because I want to learn more about a particular subject. And so I might go deep for a while into a particular subject or a person from history or some kind of theological concept or something. But then there are other times it's just, I want to read that because I'm fascinated by who this person is or what it is they have to offer, what they're saying, or this topic, just piques my interest. For me, though, one of the things that I most appreciate about some of my heroes in the Christian faith, when there's an emphasis on theological, fidelity, just theological expertise, understanding like what it is we believe and why we believe it, a personal sense of spiritual formation, piety, of like wanting to grow closer to the Lord and really apply God's word to your heart. And then also this asking the question of what is our current moment and what does faithfulness look like in our current moment? What does it look like for us to be Christians in the culture that God has placed us in the society where God has us? And so I think those 3 things for me, theology, culture, and, spiritual growth. If you've read any of my work or you read my work for a long time, it's not going to be very long before you bump into those elements. And some people I think like my work more because they like my cultural analysis. Other people because they like my, theological reflections. Other people because I talk about spiritual disciplines and things like that. To me, I want to be hitting all of those because I think that integrated vision really is what inspires me.
I just read your article this morning from TGC, and I'm also a subscriber on your personal website, and just your emphasis on reading, and that this is kind of a rebellious thing in our time to kind of cultivate the mind versus being formed by culture. And I appreciated that. I feel that, like, as a reader and as a writer, that there are these forces against me that keep me from the habit of discipline and of reading and those kind of things. So I can see that you are a well-read person. So tell us a little bit more about, like, what does that look like for you personally? And are you looking for material that seems relevant to the time? Because it does seem like you're very timely on some cultural things. So explain that to us a little bit more. Like, how does that work for you and your practice?
Yeah, I do wanna be timely, but I think what makes something timely for us as Christians is also it's that connection between what is immediately applicable and timely in terms of cultural analysis, but also timeless in terms of this is unchanging truth. Like, that's really where the excitement is, where the thrill of orthodoxy is. It's in orthodoxy meeting contemporary life. I'm often reading in, all these different kinds of streams. I finished a book, a recent book of philosophy a couple of days ago about time and about grief and about why is it that, we expect grief to subside over time if the circumstances that caused the grief are still with us. Why is it that we think if we grieve too little, it's devaluing the person that we may have lost? Why is it if we grieve too much, people will say we're not leading our lives, we're letting emotions hold us captive for too long. And it was just fascinating and profound thoughts. And I'm not even sure I'm going to write anything about that, but the subject interested me. And so I picked up the book. I had read something online about it and it stretched me a bit. And I don't know where or when that particular title that I picked up and read is going to come out in a blog article for the Gospel Coalition, or if it'll come out in something that I'm writing or teaching. I was interested in it, and so I went ahead and took it. There are lots of other things that I read that are similar to that. When you're in school, you have to read what they tell you to read, and that's good because it pushes you into areas maybe you have to read books you wouldn't have picked up otherwise, and it helps you to grow in your breadth of your education. But once you finish your studies, from that point on, you're reading because other people recommend things, or you're just intrigued by a topic, or maybe you're interested in a historical figure. Reading for me is it gets all different kinds of my brain going. And then later when I'm writing about something or I'm thinking about something, often I'll be like, oh, I remember that illustration from that one person's life, or there was this particular thing that I remember a devotional writer said that I want to use that quote. And so it's like you have this sort of file cabinet in your mind of things that you've read and you can pull from when you want to pull something together and you want to say something in a fresh way that will engage people.
Yeah, you're pulling from information that you're like you said, it's like a little file cabinet in your mind that you're kind of storing up for later use. So you're referring to this one book you just finished. Now you do have to do quite a bit of output, it seems. I think, do you write a weekly article for TGC or is it more than that?
I actually do twice a week. I take a couple months off a year depending on the season, but it's twice a week. I mean, it comes out to about anywhere between 70 and 90,000 words a year just in columns. Either for Gospel Coalition or for Mere Orthodoxy or First Things, World. These are all places I've contributed to.
So do you feel like that's a lot of output? You must, and like you said, you must have a lot of input. Does it feel like, gosh, I read this book, I need to glean something from it in order, to put something back out? Or do you feel the freedom to just be like, oh, that was great, I might return to that later? How does that work itself out for you?
I think it's more of the second. I read enough that there's just extra stuff I'm reading that may never work its way into anything I write. I say that it wouldn't work its way into something I write specifically, but it may still work its way into something that I write in terms of just influencing my thought process or sharpening me as a thinker. There's a couple of things that I do in order to get ideas for writing. One is I read a lot, and when I come across ideas when I'm reading, if there's a book and there's a particular moment where I'm like, "Oh, that is a good inspiration for a thought or something I might want to write about." I use the writing app called Ulysses, and it's my favorite writing app. It's just it's really nice. It's very clean, it's very minimalistic. It's like you and, what you're writing, and it kind of keeps a word count up at the top so you know if you're getting too long or, what you can shoot for. I love Ulysses, and I have like a file, and I'll just do a quote from a book or an idea that's prompted by a book, and I just fill that thing up with different ideas, and they can sit there for months, sometimes even years. But it's like when I need to write and I know I'm going to write something, I love going to that file and kind of flipping through it and saying, okay, kind of strikes me today as the one I would want to write and maybe build on. Sometimes I'll delete them. They'll sit there for a while. I thought, oh, that was a half baked idea. I don't think that's going to actually, make its way into a formal, full column or something. But that's where reading comes in. The other thing is conversations. I love going and I like speaking at different conferences, visiting churches, talking with other church leaders, hearing what are the issues that they're dealing with, what are their questions, what are their concerns, because that influences what I read. If I want to serve others well, then the reading can help do that. It'll guide my reading to some extent. And then also, a lot of ideas get prompted in conversation. And so that's another place where I wind up with ideas to write about.
So that's fascinating. Thanks for sharing the Ulysses app idea. That helps you keep track of ideas. Is that where you write as well, or is that more of like a tracker?
It is where I write as well. So usually if, what I'll do is I'll start a new file and I'll just drop the idea in there. And I like the way Ulysses has it to where you can basically see all your files and scroll up and down. It's a little bit easier and less cumbersome than like a Microsoft Word or something like that. I do go into Ulysses and write. The cool thing is if you let it sit there for a while, you may find other things, like maybe you watch a movie or a television show, or in conversation with someone, the same topic, you bump up against it again. And then you're like, oh, that would fit well in that idea that I've got over there. And so I'll go add that to the file. And so eventually you might even have, instead of just an initial idea or a quote from a book, you may have 2 or 3 things. The idea is beginning, it's just kind of percolating a little bit. And then when I go to write, I generally will go ahead and take that idea and I'll go ahead and outline, this is what I want to do in the exact same file, spend a couple of hours working on an initial draft. And then after there, it's just refinement and editing it until I'm ready to publish it.
I love the idea too of just having your ear to the ground. And I'm sure that's where all of the cultural analysis and kind of hearing the things people are talking about, people are feeling can really come in handy to make sure that you're staying relevant. So with so much like regular output, 2 articles a week, that sounds so overwhelming to me. I'm sure you've built up the muscle to do that. Tell us, like, how far in advance are you planning? Do you kind of map out the next month or 2 months of your writing, making room for tweaks and kind of pop culture events, things like that might be more timely?
Yeah, I like to be at least a couple weeks ahead, to where there's always 4 or 5 in the queue. Sometimes I'll get even way ahead and I'll be, basically a month out from when it's publishing. My preference is to be about a month ahead, is because if there is something culturally that happens, like let's say, I mean, just as in a recent example, I had several articles in the queue, but I saw the Pixar movie Hoppers recently and I loved it. And it prompted a thought about really paying attention to the nature and the miracles that are all around us and just the beauty of creation. And I thought, oh, this is an article. It's very Chestertonian, who's one of my favorites. And I thought, this would be a great article to put together. And I could have put it together and put it in the queue for later, but because the movie had just come out and I had seen it right when it released, I just went ahead and dropped it in, and I released it the same week that I wrote it. That's unusual, but it's nice to have the flexibility to be able to move things around based on things. There are times when, I will have written something maybe a month ago or, anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks prior, but something is happening culturally that everyone is talking about. And some people will think I'm speaking to that cultural thing indirectly. And sometimes I'm not. Actually, I wrote it before whatever it is that's the big topic of conversation. And so occasionally will move around an article that I don't want to get lumped in with whatever the topic is that's being discussed. I'll change the order at some point just because I want to be able to say what I want to say without people thinking necessarily that I'm commenting on whatever the big, topic of debate or controversy or cultural thing is happening.
Yeah, I can see that would be really an important, aspect to what you're doing and being able to control a little bit of the flow of info that's going out. So tell us too, like, I mean, we're talking a lot about kind of these short form content pieces that you write, you do articles, but you also have written so many books. How does that fit into your rhythm of writing? And are you always working on a book, or do you have a book contract where you're fulfilling obligations? What does that look like for you?
I'm generally always working on some kind of project. It's not always, just a straight up like a regular book. I look at the column as a way of working out some ideas in public. And a lot of my columns, it's not like the books are the columns sort of dropped in as chapters or anything, but you work long enough on different topics and different things. And then when you want to write about something more specifically, you do have some resources you can draw from at some level as at least a starting point. This is one of the reasons why I really appreciate the habit of writing regularly. I've noticed, for example, when I read the weekly essays from one of my favorite authors, G.K. Chesterton, who wrote prolifically, way more prolifically than anything I've ever tried, just millions and millions of words. But he would write these newspaper columns. And, I've read enough of Chesterton and his books to realize that some of his newspaper columns, it's almost like you can read the proto version of whatever makes it into his book, because he'll be fleshing out ideas or wondering about things or throwing out some one-liners and like testing things in the columns that then make their way into a really fully formed view for the books. I think that's been really helpful for me as well. There are some projects where there's not as much overlap. You're writing in a particular vein. I've written some fiction before, theological fiction kind of a thing, and it's none of that work really started as a column. It was just me working a different muscle. But for the most part, I like there to be interplay between my preaching and teaching, my writing columns, and then book writing, to see where, all these things can be working together to hopefully lead to help for readers.
Yeah, so many of the women who are on this call today and who will probably listen to this later, they're shepherding much smaller platforms and really working through like blogging and Substack and that kind of thing. How do you look at that? I don't know if you ever did that aspect of writing because you're on this national platform. But did you start out blogging and then like subsequent to that, like, do you believe in blogging? Like what you were saying was my experience, like getting to work out some ideas on my blog that turned later into a book was really helpful for me. And you do get to see like, how are people responding to this? Is this hitting a nerve? That kind of thing. So what would you say to other writers who are like working to develop the craft, develop their message, those kind of things, meet a particular audience? Do you believe in blogging? Do you think that that's still alive? That's always kind of a controversial topic.
Yes, blogging for me was really where I got my start in writing in public. It was blogging and it was email newsletters before it was cool. So I did, back when I was in college, I started writing a weekly devotional based on something Jesus had said. It was called the Red Letters Devotional. And it was only 300 to 350 words. I made sure that I was within that range of word count, and I send it out once a week on Fridays usually, and it would go out to a subscriber list that I managed through Yahoo back in the day. So that's really where I started just writing regularly for an audience. Blogging was perfect for me because I was in seminary and I was learning all these amazing things, and I had all these thoughts. I had done cross-cultural mission work already at that stage in my life, and I wanted to have this place where I could connect with other writers and thinkers and be in good conversations and interview people and review books that I was reading. And so blogging was fantastic for me because it was in a season, especially from like 2006 until I moved to the Gospel Coalition in 2012. I really had 6 years as an independent blogger where I just enjoyed the eclectic nature of blogging at the time. Before social media really became a thing, blogging was social media. You would find other people's blogs through the blog list on the side, and people would share each other's articles or comment on each other's articles and leave comments. And so I really loved that. Moving to TGC was at a time when a lot of blogs were consolidating into networks or neighborhoods. And so Jared Wilson, a friend of mine, he also a very prolific author, has way more books than I do. Jared and I both moved our blogs to the Gospel Coalition the same week. And we were kind of moving into the same neighborhood. And from about that time, I moved my rhythm to, instead of 7 days a week, it was more like 2 days a week. And I really focused more on columns and listing of links, kind of curating things for other people, things that I found interesting that I thought other people might find helpful or beneficial in some way. And I've really kept at that rhythm for a long time now. So, but back to the controversial question, is blogging dead? I don't think the craft of writing in the style of a blog is dead. I still do that. There are still, Tim Challies is a friend of mine, the blog father, we call
That's
him,
great.
the one who's done it for a long time. But yeah, I don't think that that is dead, but I do think it's evolved and it's changed in a lot of ways because of social media, because of the nature of things now. So Substack in some ways feels like more like blogging than before the rise of Substack, because you have your own dedicated audience. You're able to write for a particular group of people. You can write in a way that, helps you get better at the craft of writing. You can connect with people again. A lot of people leave comments on Substacks. It's not the same thing as the old days of blogging, but it is definitely, it's almost like blogging 2.0. And I'm really glad to see it.
Yeah, I am too. I have a space on Substack. I am kind of developing my own platform, but I envy it in a lot of ways because it is the place where writers and readers are hanging out. And so, in a way that social media has kind of maybe pushed that kind of crowd out, maybe you and Tim Challies and those who have kind of started like in the heyday of blogging. It seems like you got in at a very good time and were able to come over to TGC. I think a lot of people look at what you're doing and that seems, next level. It would be amazing to be a columnist and on a platform like that. But even if writers just want to be seen on those platforms, like what's your advice to them? Because to have that byline would be, a great thing for a lot of writers, a very legitimizing thing. How would you recommend writers who have that ambition go about doing that?
Well, the best way to be seen or to get attention when it comes to writing, one of the best ways, there are some ways that are really good at getting attention, but not necessarily good at developing you as a thoughtful voice over time. There's all kinds of ways to get attention.
Sure.
So not all of them are equal. But I do think when it comes to, maybe some of the publications, places like Christianity Today or the Gospel Coalition or For the Church or Mere Orthodoxy or World Magazine or whatever these places might be, one of the best ways to get noticed from a publication is to do something really substantive that speaks very powerfully to people at a particular moment on your own platform. So, it might be a Substack, it could be a newsletter, whatever it might be. And that winds up gaining some traction. Maybe you notice some new followers because of it. And you see that, oh, there's a lot of people that are resonating with this thing that I've written. That's when you can take something and you can send it to an editor at one of these publications, or just say, hey, would there be any interest in like running this article if it sort of fits the audience and feel of whatever the publication is, because you could say, hey, I published it here at my Substack, but my Substack only has this many followers, but it's resonated with people outside of my normal list of followers, and so maybe it would be a fit for one of these other publications. You don't want to begin with pitching yourself. What you want to begin with is pitching a great idea, a great concept, well executed in a column form. If you're pitching that, it's true you are pitching yourself as the writer of that, as someone who has at least some level of authority or expertise to speak to whatever it is that you've written about. You're writing in such a way, when you do talk to an editor or you have that initial conversation, you have something to point to. And it may not go anywhere, but you get enough of those, you kind of get on the radar. I mean, there's a young guy right now that I've seen his work pop up probably 3 or 4 times since the beginning of the year, with some really solid, insightful cultural analysis on this particular moment in the American context. I think he's probably in his late 20s or early 30s. I mean, a really young guy, but he's doing really good work. And there's no question that guy's going to be published at some of these bigger outlets, because he's gotten to the point where a few of his articles are just too good to be ignored. And I've seen a couple of them show up in some other places, cross-posted. Eventually, I think he'll be writing some for some of those outlets. So that's the big focus. Be as absolutely as good as you can possibly be in what it is you're working on.
And maybe that kind of answers the "is blogging dead?" question, because really you have, like you said, to kind of work out those ideas for yourself on your own platform, whatever that may be, and hopefully gain the attention of some of those bigger names. That's an encouragement for people who are, just being faithful in the small places that they are already working. Circling back a little bit to the book writing, we had some questions in the comment section of, can you give us a day in the life of your writing life, maybe a typical day, if you're especially juggling both, ongoing commitment level to TGC and your own writing spaces, and then also like other projects that you're working in, and you're also a father and a husband, and so you're a pastor, so you're doing a lot of things. So tell us a little bit about what that like a daily rhythm looks like for you.
So I don't write every single day. If I have a day where, I lead a team at the North American Mission Board, and sometimes I just have days where there's lots of meetings and things and there's no time to write. But I do try to keep most of my meetings, the amount of travel that I do and meetings, at least to keep them down to where I've got some good solid windows of time to do some writing over the course of a few months. My days don't all look the same, but I want, like, in every 3 months or so, there's gonna be some days where my number of meetings or podcasts or speaking things or whatever it might be is going to be lower. My default is back to writing. So I do try to preserve some time. There's a place I go often on Friday mornings that is here in the Nashville area, a place where a lot of other writers and creative types and whatnot will come together, and we all kind of write separately, but we all enjoy some fellowship, and are able to have some coffee or tea and some breakfast and just enjoy writing in community. And that's a few hours on Friday mornings. And if I'm not traveling, that's where I'm at. I keep that time pretty devoted so that it rarely does a week go by where I'm not writing something, whether it's a column, a couple of columns, or whatever it might be. For books, it's a little bit different because books require more sustained attention over a longer period of time. And so to write a book well, I'll almost always, in fact, I can't think of a book that I have written where I didn't have at least one, sometimes two, maybe even three getaways, where for basically 4 nights, 3 days or so, I'm away somewhere just writing up a storm,
Wow.
just deep work, like Cal Newport says, really focused. And I like doing that even at editing phase after a book's initial draft is done and I'm really refining it, honing it. That's when you have to do what John Stott called the pain in mind work, PIM. You don't get good writing done without the pain. And sometimes you just have to set aside the time to get that work done.
I love that. Pain in mind. Yeah, I think that's where a lot of the best writing probably comes from, because you have to like wrestle through that in your own thinking to make it clear to a reader. So that's really good. Well, I would love to open it up for some Q&A.
Hi, Trevin.
Hi, Michelle.
You talked about the refining process that you use after writing your initial draft of an article. And I was wondering if you do that same process before you submit the first draft of a book manuscript, if you do your first draft and then also go through and edit it yourself, kind of to what extent you do the editing process before the actual editorial process.
So I have experience both in the writing and the editing side of things. For a number of years, I was the managing editor of the Gospel Project curriculum, which meant that I was taking other people's writings, I was editing them myself so that they would be aligned with the Gospel Project voice. And so generally speaking, I think those are two different hats. One thing that will kill you as a writer is if you're trying to be both writer and editor at the same time. It's like you need, the editor is the judge who comes in and with fresh eyes looks at your work. The judge will freak you out if that tries to barge in on the writing process. You got to let the judge stay in his place until it's his time. And then when the judge comes out, that's great, but that's later. I love that stage. To answer your question specifically, it's my second or third draft by the time it goes to the editors for the book, even though I call it the first draft because it's the first one they're seeing. But it's generally going to be very clean, grammatical stuff at a very minimum. Like, this is the book that, like, I want my first draft of a book to already be publishable. Like, if, that at that point it's, we're going to just make it better and better. And the reason why I think that's important is you want that book to be the very best it can be. And so the very best thing I think you can do as a writer is give those editors your very best work from the get-go, assuming, like, make it almost like they're not even coming behind you. You want it to be so good, and then watch the magic they can do with it when all of their emphasis is on making a good book great rather than making a so-so book good. Like, I want my editors, when they come up behind me, to be able to just make this thing soar because I've already given them a great lift off. And so that's the approach I take. I want it to be super well edited before it gets to the editorial process.
That's really good. I'm wondering too, like, I love your illustration of the judge. I think my judge comes out way too early. But I often feel like that is part of the writing process, don't you? Because, like, really, you have to get to that point where it's like, this is making sense. This is good. What does that look like for you? Are you one of those, like, get it all out on the page real quick and then go back, fill it in, and make it coherent and clean? Or do you labor over first, second, third paragraphs, get that really tight, and then flow? Like, I'm just curious, what does that look like for you?
So for the columns, I wind up on a column. I've been doing these so long for so many years now, and so many of them that all of these different stages are compressed. But when I say stages, I think it's from a Harvard Business Review article or something that has these 4 stages of writing: the madman, the architect, the carpenter, and then the judge. And the madman is the brainstorming, the idea, the whole, like, where, it's like me dropping all these ideas into my file and like just throwing stuff out there. That's the madman. But then the architect comes along and is like, okay, let's try to bring some structure into this, to outline this. Like, what is it we're trying to say? What's the thesis statement? Like, where's this column going, or this chapter going? And so the architect architect is helping you, is giving you a blueprint for, hey, let's see how this works. The carpenter then comes in and like fills it all in. And that's really where you get some great momentum going, because you're really just, hammering away at whatever it is you think that you think you wanted to say, and you get it out there. So you started with brainstorming, then you outlined and kind of thought through the structure. Now you're filling in all the pieces. You may alter the structure a little bit here and there just because the carpenter has his own views. And then finally, that's when you bring the judge in. And the judge comes in at the end to really look. And sometimes I like to let things lie for a couple of days and come back in. And I'll keep coming back as the judge for some of my articles if they've been written even for a couple of weeks in advance. Like just today, I have one for next week, for next Tuesday, that I just looked at this morning. I had about 10 minutes to look over that column, and I just made a couple of last tweaks to it. It's in pretty good shape. It's about ready to go. But the more time you give yourself, the more perspective you have and freshness, you can come back as the judge and not take it so seriously when it can feel really demoralizing. If the judge gets involved too soon, it slows down your carpentry work, and then you start laboring under the fear of, this is not good. I think the judge is my favorite part of writing, but he comes at the end and then comes multiple times, to like check things and see how things are going. But he can paralyze you if you let him in too soon.
Yeah, I love that. I love that illustration too. I love the judge too. I feel like at the judge stage, like the pain in, what was it? Pain in motion.
Pain in mind. Yeah.
Pain in mind. Like you've kind of worked through that a lot. And so that feels satisfying to be
Totally
at that stage.
Question. Hi, Trevor. Thank you for talking to us today. A question for you. You said you write on theology, culture, and spiritual growth. Do you consider those to be the same audiences, or are they different? And how do you balance like how much theology you assume your audience knows so that you're speaking to those at that level?
right. It's such a good question. Some articles actually are going to have all 3 in the same column. It's not as if you have a column that is only solely devoted to theology, or only solely devoted to spiritual growth, or only solely devoted to cultural engagement. Sometimes they impinge upon one another. And I love when that happens, actually. I do think overall, generally speaking, the audience is the same, in that the people that look to me as a writer that they trust or that they have benefited from in the past, it's usually because of sort of the intersection of those things. There's been something I've written on spiritual formation or growth that has been really helpful, but it's connected to theology and it's theologically rooted and grounded, but also has like cultural application. And so like they may like my work more for its cultural analysis, but they'll stick around for the others because all of it's sort of infusing all of it is the hope. So I don't think of them as different audiences, except there are times when I'm going to put on the theologian cap. So I did this a few weeks ago. I delivered an essay to Mere Orthodoxy that I had worked on for a while about the nature of the mission of the church and a pretty big debate in the field of missiology. And it was a longer than normal post. I think it was around maybe 3,500 words or so, 4,000 or so, quite a bit longer than a normal column of mine. I submitted it. It got published there. And I let my normal readers know in my email newsletter, hey, this one's a little more, I'm putting my academic cap on for this one. I still want it to be understandable. I think a lot of academic writing is not easily accessible, not because we're all stupid, but because the writer is not as clear thinking as they could be. I would hope that even if you've never been to seminary, that anybody that follows my article would be able to follow along with every single thing I wrote in that more academically minded piece because of the nature of the way I explain things and tried to, even though it's a little longer and more in depth than what my normal work would be. So I will say there is a place for the academic side where I'll put that cap on and wear that and try to contribute something to that. But I usually will tell my readers, hey, a little different than the usual fare this time around, and they stick with me. I don't lose a lot of subscribers when I do that, thankfully. So
is that a place then that you typically would be like judicious, like where you place that, where you submit that, since it's different, that like a different format than what you typically, do on your own site?
yeah, sometimes I'm going to do a longer form article of some sort and want to place it somewhere. So last year, I had a number of places I was considering. I did an article called "We Were Jesus Freaks," growing up not Christian in the 90s. And I knew from the beginning, I thought, I really want to submit this to First Things. It's a reputable magazine. And I knew that the article was going to be 5,000 words or so. And so it was going to be very long, but it was going to be this sort of take on all the Christian culture that came out of the 90s and how influential, informative it was for so many of us. I wanted that in First Things from the beginning. And so I pitched the editor there. I had met him before and he knew my work from other places. And I worked on the article. He saw what I was doing, said, yes, we want this. I could have published that at Gospel Coalition and it would have been fine. I could have published it at Mere Orthodoxy. It's possible even World would have published it, although I don't think they published that length of things. But it just felt like a fit for First Things. And so it was. So sometimes, and sometimes it's a judgment call. I posted that article there's been several at Mere Orthodoxy the last couple of years. There've been a couple of them where one of my friends at TGC has said, oh, I wish you had just published this with us. But I like to put some things out there in some different areas where maybe, they're not all following each other. And so to have some contributions in some different places, sometimes it's just a judgment call, you could go either way.
Yeah, you kind of get to fish in a different pond a little bit and get a different readership, I'm sure. And there's some overlap, but you get some new people in there as well.
Yeah, that's the idea, to spread around a little bit occasionally and just, enjoy doing that.
What would you say we've talked about both the input and the output, but for writers who are really wanting to get better, maybe they have some goals in mind, a book or just establishing themselves as a writer, what's more important? Is it reading more or writing more? Could you make a case for one or the other, or would you just say there's got to be a balance? It's got to be a 50-50 thing.
Yeah, I don't know that I would say it's 50-50. The way I look at it is reading more in order to deepen yourself so that you have more to say, but then writing more so that you say what you want to say. Reading a lot more isn't going to make you a better writer. You have to get your reps in. But just writing a bunch is not going to make you more thoughtful or engaging or insightful. You have to have your reading in. You've got to have both of them. To say it's 50-50, I hesitate to think of it that way because I don't think my habits are sort of divvied up that way. It's really more of I read, and I've been reading as much as I read for a long period of time to hopefully deepen my understanding and my ability to take in new information, to contemplate it, to think about it, to become the kind of person who has something interesting to say. But then the writing part of it, the more I write and the more I'm trying to hone the craft and learn from other writers and editors and, bring the judge in again and again and try to get better and better. You don't get anywhere without writing a lot. I had a friend a couple of weeks ago who said, hey, Trevin, I feel like everything I read from you lately, it's like your writing just is getting better. It's more vivid. It's more pulling me in even more than usual. And I love that because I am trying to improve. I'm 20 years into blogging regularly now. And it's like, I hope I'm better, 20 years in than I was, 15 years ago or so. But I think that only comes through, repeated practice and trying to,
I know all the time.
yes, just trying to improve.
I'm curious, are you on social media? What is the biggest distraction for you in terms of like that keeps you away from reading and study and all of that? Like, do you feel sucked into social media like so many of us do, or YouTube, or what is that for you?
Yeah, I think I do feel the pull of social media. I think all of us do at some level. I schedule my posts on X so that I don't have to worry about, did I post today or I schedule the articles I'm sharing there. Facebook, it doesn't take much of my time. I don't spend very much time on Instagram. I mean, occasionally we'll, look through some reels and laugh at things or just, for fun in the evening or something. But the thing is with social media, especially for me, it's Twitter. It's more to follow to see what the controversies are, what people are yelling about. Instagram is just more entertaining.
Yeah.
And either one of those, I can get sucked in and spend more time than I want on them. And then that short circuits my thought process. So like my default, and my family would say this, like if I don't have something I'm doing or I'm watching a particular show, streaming a show, or I'm doing something, or I'm not doing homework with the kids because they're finished or whatever it might be, they just know dad's going to gravitate toward reading. Like that, I'm just going to pick up a book in the evening and read. I don't do much writing in the evening. I'm not much good for that. That's like the default is they'll find me reading when, everyone's off doing their own thing or finishing up homework or whatever. And then we'll come back around, we'll watch a show together, we'll do other things. But like my default is not my phone. My default is reading. And I think that's one of the ways that I keep the juices flowing.
I really appreciate it. Even in your article today, you talked about having containers for reading and kind of those boundary markers that we need to kind of protect those times. Just the way a movie theater was, your illustration was like that's a protected time. We all know, like, wear your phone away, and when somebody's got their blue, light shining in your face, that's really annoying. So I thought that was a really insightful way to look at that. Well, before we go, I just want to ask you, like, what have you read lately that you would recommend for readers, for writers? Like, what's one book that you've really has stayed with you even after you finished it?
Well, I finished a really long biography of Harry Truman that David McCullough wrote, and I loved that. I did an article about that, about one of the moments in that book that just got me thinking, but it was really enjoyable. And I really love biography and history a lot. And so I'm finishing up now a book called Royal Panoply by Carolee Erickson. And it's basically just these little, it takes 10 minutes to read a chapter, but it's like all the kings and queens of England in chronological order. And so last night I read Victoria, and then today it's Edward VII. And it's like, it's just like you're going through, just one a day. I basically, before I go to bed at night on my Kindle, I'm just enjoying that. So it's been really good. She's really great at finding interesting things about all these kings and queens and then telling you their story in just one chapter. So it's like little snapshots. And so if you like the history of the royals, that's a fun one to look at.
Oh, that's a great recommend. That's awesome. Well, Trevin, where can we find your work? Where can we sign up to follow you, receive your posts, your articles, all the good things?
Yeah, no, I see some of these comments over here. One was asking about growing the email list. So the best place to find things, definitely the email list. Is where I basically send everything I write to that list. That's not a book, but anything that I'm publishing anywhere. And I grow that primarily from previous columns. So like every column that I write at the Gospel Coalition at the bottom will say, hey, if you'd like to subscribe to my email list and get curated links and everything, other articles, sign up here. And I'll see a bump whenever I write something that winds up becoming popular that a lot of people read. I never know where those are going to be. Last year, I was shocked at how many people read an article I wrote on The Sound of Music. I was not expecting that. That one went all over the place to the point I actually heard from the son of the actress who played the Baroness in The Sound of Music.
Oh, wow. How
So, so there are a bunch of subscribers that jumped on after that, So it's just one of those, you just never know what's going to be, popular. But email list is the best way. If you sign up, you can get my my email. At the bottom of every column, there's a link to signing up. But generally, Gospel Coalition's the best. That's kind of my home base, and then occasionally I'll venture out to the other neighborhoods and publish things there.
That's great. What is your URL? We'll put it up for the screen.
The easiest way to get to it is just to go to trevinwax.com, and it will reroute you right to my blog at the Gospel Coalition. So
Awesome.
if you click there, that should take you.
Yeah. All right. Well, Trevin, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you for being here with us and for just sharing some insights into how you work and how you're faithfully stewarding all the gifts God's given you. We're really grateful for your time.
Well, it's an honor to be with you. Keep writing.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all. We'll see you next time.